You don't want to miss this episode. We're excited to be in studio with Neal and Chandler from Master Keys. They are the #1 real estate investing podcast for Atlantic Canada. The real estate investors themselves, the real estate agents. This is exactly what people have been asking for. How do I get involved in the East Coast market? We're going to give you all the reasons why you should be and how to get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Control and Compound with Darren Mitchell. I'm your host. Joining me today is Christina Wyatt, of course. Christina, how are you?
I'm doing great, Darren. How you doing?
Great. And we've got Neal, Andreino, and Chandler, Haliburton. Guys, how you doing?
Yeah, doing good. You know, weird year. No snow here in the East Coast, which is an anomaly. It's January, approaching February, and I don't think we've ever had, we haven't even had an inch of accumulation here yet.
It was like the lowest in history. I'm dying for some snow because I like to snowboard and ski, and you just can't right now. I know a bunch of my buddies are just riding the grass.
Yeah. Me as well.
Don't you love it everywhere you go? It's like, oh, you're from the East Coast. Must be cold and snowy down there. It's like, no, we don't get snow anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, what?
We're having like a Victoria winter. Like it's super warm. It's kind of nice though. Like I'm
all about it, except the rain. As a landlord, I prefer snow to rain as a landlord because at snow, you know you're getting that plow bill. And little tip, do you pay for your plowing in advance? You do. You pay for the whole season rate.
Yeah,
I pay by the plow. I haven't paid a dime yet this year, and we are more than halfway through January. We're almost in February. Not a single dime into my plowing budget.
I'm never doing it again, but I'm paying on a monthly contract, and every month it comes out, and I'm like, you guys haven't even. They're salting. That's what I called them, and I was like, can you guys do a little better? Like, well, we're out there salting, and I'm like, yeah, okay, $4,000 of salt. We're putting it down. Like, come on, but no, it's
some expensive salt Neal's paying for right now. That's that Himalayan pink salt. They're out there going like this, grinding it on the front steps.
I hope so. God damn. But
all right, guys. So you're both real estate investors. You've got the Master Keys podcast. We'll put the links in the description. Check it out. It's a phenomenal podcast. I encourage you to go back right to the beginning and start listening. Just a wealth of information in there.
Thank you.
You're real estate investors. How did you get started in real estate investing? Was this since the day you were born, I'm going to grow up and be like, I want to be an insurance agent and I want to be a real estate investor? Like, when did the realization of investing in real estate make sense to you?
Yeah, like every child, I dreamed of being a real estate agent when I was older. I dressed up for them every Halloween. I kind of stumbled into it backwards because my initial goal was to work in academia, first as a teacher, and then I was like, all right, I'll be a prof. And then I saw all of the student rentals around the universities I went to, and I go, well, gosh, that's kind of smart. I'll just own student rentals to subsidize my income as a prof. And then in high school, I started to see more of my buddies and the families they came from that did invest in real estate, because one thing we share in common is that neither one of our families were involved in real estate investing.
Yeah, at all. Yeah, for me, I have none. I definitely didn't grow up dreaming to be a real estate agent, but I did grow up dreaming of like a certain type of lifestyle. And I think I looked through, how do you achieve that? How do you get what you kind of want? And there was different options. And I think one of the most secure, safest options in doing so was through investing in real estate. So at probably around 16 or 17, I wanted a certain type of car. And I was like, man, I want this. And I think I came across a YouTube video being like, instead of buying that car, buy a house and then take the rent and make the payment on the vehicle. And from there,
That's
I started. Yeah, it is a classic. And I started digging into it. And then from there, I just became super, super excited, and university started investing. But
so once I pivoted and I decided after I did my master's, I'm like, you know what? My PhD is going to be another 5 years. The income stream isn't maybe what I hoped it would be. And I'm delaying my life. I wanted to get started in my life. And I was just becoming obsessive about real estate. And I wasn't watching YouTube. I'm a little older than Neal. I was watching HGTV, right? And seeing these shows about rehabbing homes and selling
22
homes.
minutes. They can do it in 22 minutes.
It's amazing.
For like 10
and so
grand.
I was just like, man, I keep coming back to these shows. Like, I'm really interested in this. And then I just went and got my real estate license, and everyone was like, oh my God, like, what are you doing? And from there, started investing because I needed a place to live as well. And I believe in practicing what you preach, and started with duplexes and then scaled up.
So mom and dad were pretty excited when you said, you know what, maybe this academia, that was just a
phase.
Yeah. It's tricky because my parents, kind of blue collar, working class, very smart, but they prioritized their children's education. And then I'm just like, no thanks. I'm going to do this over here after years of private school and multiple degrees.
So I laugh when I look at you guys. So what kind of background do you need to become a real estate investor? So you have a master's in literature and you're an engineer?
I'm an engineer, yeah.
So
Yeah, I've got a degree in economics as well, which I do think helps to some degree,
Definitely,
especially in
yeah.
these uncertain times and understanding how rates are set and inflation and all that stuff. But you can get a license with your BED equivalent. And I think I always talk to investors about having a competitive advantage, right? So Neal's got the competitive advantage of familiarity with building construction, and also he's a very strong numbers guy. So his understanding of financing is really high, and I think kind of early on my advantage was working in the industry. I had a good understanding of what opportunities were there with getting lifts to get value out of properties. We're like, okay, I can buy it for this amount. I can pay myself a commission. I can renovate the property. It'll be worth this at the end, right? So you need to have a competitive advantage, and different people have different ones.
cool.
100%.
And tell me about your first purchase. What was your first purchase?
Yeah.
And how did it work out? Was it a learning experience or did you make money?
I'll go through it all. So to give a little bit more background, like I had started some small businesses prior to getting into real estate. So I was flipping small products like paint, car products, and then I was flipping cars. So I was buying cars overseas, bringing them in town, flipping them. Then I started buying locally. And it was kind of a progression. And I was like, what's the next big thing that I can flip? And that's when real estate kind of came up. On top of everywhere I looked, they're like, you can make a ton of money off real estate. You can make passive cash flow. So my first purchase was actually in partnership with two other guys. And I had the down payment because I had put it together. They also had their portion, but they also had income because I had no income. I was in university at the time. So I partnered with them. They basically signed the loan with their income, and then I put in my portion of the down payment. We bought on a main road here in Halifax. It was a illegal duplex. I can say that now. But, and when we got into it, it was really cheap. It was in like the 200s in the Halifax on the peninsula. In the Halifax area, and so we were super keen because like the rents, pretty much anything we could get, we were going to cash flow a ton.
And that was around 2015, 14?
I would have been 20, so it would have been 7 years ago now.
Yeah, 2015-ish.
Yeah, 2015.
You bought your first property at 20.
Yeah, I think it was 19. I put under contract. I think we closed right after my 20th birthday or something. Which was that was super exciting at that point to be doing that because I was still, like I said, in the midst of university. But we got into it. And it was rough, but like again, it seemed even at the lower rents that we would get, we would cash flow so much because we paid $274 for the place. So we got into it and like didn't know what we didn't know. The market wasn't that hot, and so you couldn't get great applicants at a lot of those rental rates. And so our first tenant that we got paid maybe 1 month, and then it bounced, and they gave us pre-written checks, whatever, post-date checks, and they started bouncing from there. They wouldn't answer the door. We didn't really know the process of tenancy to get them kicked out. They kind of made a mess of the property. There's garbage everywhere.
Stole some appliances.
Yeah,
on the way
it took about 4 months to finally, like, me just standing at the door, just banging it. I can see them walking around the house. They just wouldn't come to the door. They'd look at me and walk away. And probably because I was 20 years old and, like, we're going to just punk this kid off. And so I'm smashing at the door, and finally he comes over. And I'm like, all right, here's the eviction paperwork. Like I'd gone to the tenancy board and figured it out. And then they were gone a few weeks later, and I went in, and they didn't destroy the house completely. It was a bit of a mess, but they stole all the appliances. And I was
Nice.
like, Jesus, really? Like, and Chandler made a good point. They took that money to then probably go and make their deposit on the next house.
Yep.
And I actually still see that gentleman today, once in a while, walking around.
Literally
and I'm like,
rinse and repeat.
yeah,
Rinse
but anyway,
you,
so that was
and
my
repeat
first
someone
deal.
else.
We then sold the house. The market had just started to pick up in 2018 at that point, and I think we sold for around 300. So we kind of netted a profit on that because I, at that point, had gotten my real estate license, so I was able to sell it for cheaper than it would be with a regular agent. But as a whole, did we make money? I wouldn't say so. I think we really kind of came out break even, and the experience, I think, tainted it for my partners. And for some reason, I decided that was a great experience and to dive in head first. And as you mentioned, like I have about 100 units now. So yeah, but it was definitely a sharp learning curve because I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't even understand the BRRRR model at that point. Like I was just like, I know I need to get into real estate, and I'll figure it out once I'm in there. So that's my first purchase. And yeah, like I said, I continued after that.
Cool.
Yeah, mine. So I just started my real estate career. So I was 24 going on 25. My wife was starting her career as a substitute teacher. So neither one of us had great income by the bank standards. The nice thing was back then at this time, your rental contribution from a tenant was looked at much more favorably. Now they effectively take the rental income, cut it in half, and then apply it to your income. So if you're looking at a debt service ratio of like 40%, you're at the end of the day getting 40% of 50% of that income. So it's very small. Whereas by contrast, at the time that I was purchasing, which would have been 2009, they would take the entire rental income and credit it all against the mortgage. So if the mortgage on this property was going to be $1,200 and there was rental income of $750, all you needed to qualify for was $450, like the balance. So that's how we got approved for our first unit. Then we had to come up with the down payment, but fortunately I was paying myself 2.5% off the deal and representing ourselves. So there was 2.5% of my 5% down payment because I was going to own or occupy. And then I took out an RRSP loan, which you're familiar with RRSP loan products, and I took one that doesn't report to credit, so it didn't appear on my debt servicing. And then on the 91st day, I took the RRSPs out because you can take your RRSPs out tax-free. Some of your listeners would probably understand, provided it's for your first purchase. But the requirement is they have to be in there for 90 days. So I took a loan, $10,000 RRSP loan, 91st day, took it out, used it in conjunction with my commission to close the purchase on place. And I thought this was unbelievable. We're living in one unit. There's a tenant next door paying us $750. Yeah. So we were living really cheap and had a good experience because it wasn't a property that needed to be completely overhauled, but I did do some work to it. And man, we bought that property for $234,000 in May of 2009. And I think the last appraisal I had for it was like around $600,000. And I've probably pulled out over the years $250,000 of equity out of that property at different stages. Like I've probably refinanced that property 3 times in the 13 years since, maybe even more. And then I used that to buy multiple properties. My vision was to buy a property every year for 10 years. That way I would hit 35 and I'd have 10 properties and then I could assess and make my next moves. But what I discovered is after I'd bought 5 properties in 5 years, I was now at the point where the banks are like, listen, you're going to have to put 20% down because I was doing the owner-occupied in each property. 5% owner-occupied this one, move to another duplex. 5% owner-occupied that, move to another duplex. But they're like, you can't be owner-occupying all 5 of these properties. Now you have to put 20% down. And having to put the 20% down was a game changer for me. It made me realize, okay, I need to leverage this money as much as I can and putting down $80,000, which you have to understand at the time, that was more money than I could even fathom. It was more money than I thought I'd be making in a year, let alone in single refinances or cumulative refinances. Taking all that money to just buy a duplex at the time, you know, some people are going to cringe when they hear that but inflation based, that was a lot of money to put down on a duplex. And I realized that I should probably be taking that money and trying to buy more than 2 doors. And so I refinanced all 5 of my properties to buy a 12 unit. And then kind of grew from there, accumulating land, and at last count, I was at 106 doors.
Yeah, that's crazy. And you started with such different stories, right? One sounded positive, the other not so much.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I mean, Neal and I have partnered up here recently in the last couple of years through both our sales business and the podcast. And I've learned a lot from him because at the time, when I was starting this out, I had access to HGTV, which is all essentially fake. Sorry for your listeners out there, spoiler alert. And YouTube had not taken off and podcasts were non-existent. So the access to information was really limited. And, you know, credit to a really good broker that I had, Igor Gashelin, who I've kind of came up with. You know, he was giving me, you know, some of these insights about financing and the options available to me, but there were less resources. And Neal grew up in a slightly younger generation that had access to all these things, like the BRRRR model that everyone talks about now. That was just what people did. It wasn't labeled anything. We didn't really know what we were doing. It was just this savvy idea that everyone was implementing. And now that's kind of the first thing everyone learns before they've even thought about buying a property is they understand this. So
everyone's first property they try and BRRRR.
Yeah. And I was doing the same thing.
Yeah.
I just didn't even really know it, and I had to kind of learn it by doing and with a couple people around me. Whereas now you can click on a video and understand the basics of it. So, you know, the whole old dog, new tricks. I've learned a lot from Neal over the last couple of years, with how he's leveraged financing. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Christina.
I was just going to ask Neal, I know you started with the joint venture, but I feel like you might have switched it up a bit to growing out those 100 units. Did you kind of go the BRRRR route following that first joint venture, or how did you grow out your portfolio?
So I still didn't know what was the play after that, because at that point in time, from the time I bought it to the time I sold it, basically, like, it didn't really appreciate. It went up by like 3-4% a year. It was pretty standard. So I actually looked at foreclosures at that point, because the foreclosure market here, there was a fair number of them and people weren't really bidding on them. Like, I went to the auctions and there was nobody at these auctions. So I just went to them like consistently. I picked up a property for $100,000, which, yeah, it's like a full on house. And I drive by it today and I'm like, that's insane. Like, I paid $100,000 for that house at one point in time, and I got to it and it had new windows, new siding, and a new roof. I opened the front door and it was a hoarding house and it was full to the brim with garbage. But anyways, cleaned it all out, resold it, made about $80,000 on that. And then actually rolled that into a triplex in the south end of Halifax. Which
And again,
is,
how young were you at this point?
I'm still in university, so
80,000, and I mean $80,000. So when you're young, especially, it's like, oh my god.
I'm in engineering at this
Like-
point, and like studying my ass off. Any of your engineers, you'll know it is a grind, and like you're just miserable. And I remember going through that process of the flip while I was in school, and then getting that paycheck. I was like, holy shit! Like, this is more than I'll make when I graduate. Like, this is insane.
You feel like you cracked the code.
I feel like I cracked the code. But the one that really broke it for me was, at that same time, I bought a triplex in the South End. With that money, it ended up selling for $350. Again, it was up for $700. They dropped it to $600, then to $500, then to $350. Bought that and turned it into a triplex. And again, I didn't know, like, I knew that converting it, but I didn't totally understand the BRRRR model until I converted it into a triplex with the help of somebody. And then I got the reappraisal and it came back at $900,000. And I was like, whoa. I spent $140,000. I bought it for $350 and now it's worth $900,000. And so same thing, I got my refi and I was sitting in class again when the money hit my account and it was $177,000. And I was like, all right, screw this shit. Like, I was ready to quit engineering. I went home, I was like, I'm done with this shit. Like, this is a waste of my time. Like, especially on the refi, it was tax free. I was like, holy shit.
That's the other thing. And I don't know, we're assuming your listeners know what the BRRRR model is.
Yeah,
right?
sure. You can
Okay.
do a quick recap. though, if
You know,
want.
it's buy the property, rehab or renovate the property, rent the property, then refinance the property for more money, take your equity out, and then you repeat.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the model that we were doing. Again, not entirely knowing, but in that example, when Neal was able to do his refinance based off of $900,000 valuation as opposed to what he paid for it, he's able to pull out this money. And you get these checks and...
Yeah, so I got that money at that point, and I was like, holy shit, like, this is crazy. Now, I was young, and I was trying to get into everything, and I had this belief that because I succeeded on those, I could succeed in anything. And so I bought a bunch of crypto. I lost a ton of money on that. I ended up investing in a contracting company, which I still own to this day, and I wouldn't necessarily say I lost a bunch of money there, but it tied up a good portion of my capital. So it slowed things down for me for a few years, trying to get that sorted out. But at that same time, I came up to graduation. I was like, I had already chosen I'm not working as an engineer. So the day I finished my last exam, I literally left the engineering hall, drove straight to the real estate board, and I said, when's your next licensing exam? And they said 2 weeks. And I was like, done, sign me up. She's like, you got to do the course. The course takes 4 weeks, blah, blah, blah.
Neal thought he could just audit the course and just skip right to the exam.
I was cocky engineer, and I was like, yeah, I can see. I can
show
do
him
this.
the ring. Like, what do you mean?
I was like, come on, I don't got to do this course. But she's like, well, the other option is you can do it online, but you have to submit the online course, and you have to pass whatever 20 quizzes online by Friday for the following Friday's exam. Like, you have to submit it a week in advance. And I was like, yeah, I'll do that. So I signed up for that course 2 weeks later, or that exam 2 weeks later. Went home, signed for the course, and then during like graduation week, I basically would party at night, and then for about 16 hours during the day, I would go through the real estate licensing course, completed that, went, wrote the exam, passed. The passing score was like 70. I think I got like a 71. Like, I squeaked in.
Pass is a pass.
Pass is a pass. Got my license, and I went straight to Remax, got licensed with them, and kind of went with that. But same thing, my parents were like, what in the hell are you doing? Also similar, like, they didn't have necessarily the opportunity to educate themselves as much. Like, their parents didn't get to do that for them. And they did that for me. They helped me get through engineering. And so they were like, whoa. Becoming a real estate agent? Like, what in the world? But fortunately, it was like the timing was good. It was around 2018. Market started to pick up. I was investing. And so as the market picked up, my real estate agent business basically grew exponentially. Like, it was insane, the growth that I had there, and I took every single dime I had from that and I went and bought real estate. And I really struck gold one time when I came across an 11-unit building that was vacant in Spryfield, and the seller was a sweetheart. She liked me, she worked with me, she gave me a huge loan herself to buy the property from her, and I was able to get that done. And same thing, when I refinanced that, I pulled out, I don't even know, $700,000, and it was just like it was off to the races at that point. Like it was. Then I thought I went out and basically bought the rest of the street, so I owned most of the buildings on that street, and kind of just kept going.
So the BRRRR strategy, love the BRRRR strategy, and everybody wants to do the BRRRR strategy. Put your money in, you do the renovation, you haul all your money out.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem as common these days, hauling a portion of your money out or some money out. What about the Halifax market on a BRRRR strategy? Can you still get to a point where you're hauling all your money out after a year or whatever long it takes to do that? Or
We might have differing opinions on this.
Yeah, I mean, so we recently did our projections on our podcast of what's going to be hot and what's going to not be hot this year. And I don't think the BRRRR model is going to be as hot as it has been historically. And I think you could say that almost across the country, wherever someone is listening to. The reason is you could be a moron. You were still going to make money in real estate the last few years, right? Like anything you bought,
confirm.
you know, like if you just if you did nothing at all, first of all, the property was going to go up. If you did anything, the property was going to go up. Even if you overspent, the appreciation would have covered you. So a lot of people were running around making money when they didn't necessarily know what they were doing. The margins are not going to be the same right now. Because you need that lift between what you pay for it and then what it's going to be worth at the end. And when you think about you're going to refinance the property and continue to have it, but as a rental, well, if you're refinancing at a 6.5% rate, that's a lot different than when you're refinancing at 2.5 or 3 during the good times over the last few years. So, is it still going to be possible for the really savvy? Sure, it is. It's not going to be as juicy, but for those that aren't as sharp with their numbers and are over reliant on the end valuation, they're going to struggle. But the first key of the BRRRR model is the B. That's the buy. Like you only make money if you have a good buy. So again, it's just going to take a little bit more work. That's just the reality of the situation we're heading into. It's going to be sharper pencil time.
Yeah, 1,000,000% on that. Like it's so important that now that the buy is good. Before you could always make it up with the fact that the end values just kept going up and up and up. And then the other thing is, it depends on your objective. If you're not in like ultra extreme growth mode, you can still buy and probably get majority of your money back, and then leave a ton of equity in there and maybe look at getting it out in a few years. So if you're comfortable doing that, being like, yeah, I want to do one a year, you can probably still work along. If you're trying to aggressively grow your portfolio, I think it's going to be very difficult, or you need to look outside of town.
This is why we also predicted that some of these joint venture partnerships are going to be a little more challenging, because it's really easy when you can promise your investor a 10% return in 8 months. Well, now it's like, you know what? To get all your money back, even, it might be 2 years.
Yeah.
And how many people in this environment are going to want to tie up their money for 2 years on a speculative return? Like, I don't see the investors behind the scenes backing these people as readily. So, for those two reasons, I think it's going to be a little trickier to BRRRR. But I think our market here, hyper-locally in Halifax, is going to be strong for the next 18 months. Not what it was, but still relatively strong. Other markets in Canada, it's kind of pick and choose.
Great. So let's talk about the Halifax market. So we had the huge upswing in the last couple of years. Talk about that a little bit, and then where we are today, and where we think we're going in the future, and that's residential as well as multi-unit. Where do you think, where are we and where are we going?
Yeah, I think like the huge upswing, the number one contributing factor is immigration. Like hands down, it's just a simple fact. If we don't have enough inventory, I wouldn't say it's like we got some, I don't know, a stadium or some district or a tech hub or anything really there changed. Yeah, we've had a lot of tech companies show up and a lot of other industry come, but it hasn't been like one set thing like we had in the past where the shipyard showed up and then we had this boom to follow. Plain and simple, it's Canadian immigration's way up. That's why all the cities felt it. And Atlantic Canada, they basically doubled it. And now it looks like they're going to be quadrupling it. Like it just keeps going. And we just weren't building at a pace to sustain this, right? And so it just became a point where inventory wasn't there. So if you have 5 people that want an apartment or 5 people that want a house, the price is going to get forced up, right? Now, was it needed and kind of justified? I think so for most of it, honestly, because a lot of homes, like I remember when I first started, you could buy a decent home for 190 grand. Like,
Yeah.
And that's only 2018, 2019. Like
Less than the replacement cost.
Exactly. You could not rebuild them for that much money, not even considering the land value. And other cities in Canada were like at least double, if not triple that on average. So we were just way behind on pricing to begin with. So the first big bump that we had, I think, was kind of justified. I'd say the last couple of months, it started to get a little out of hand. But that's why I think I have some confidence that the prices aren't going to fall off as heavily, especially where we still have a ton of pent up demand. And we're really not that overblown relative to what other markets are. Like it's not like you're seeing these land values, and we were talking about a lot earlier that sold for $750,000, but it's a huge lot on a lake, and that's a little different. But the average like neighborhood lots are still selling for like 150 grand, which I think is a reasonable price to pay for a piece of land once you consider the road that goes in, the sidewalk, all the infrastructure that needs to go in to make that a viable piece of land. Versus like in some cities, it's like $2 million for a piece of land. People buying houses in Ontario for $2 million to tear them down and build another house, and I'm like, that's insanity. Like that to me seems very overinflated. So I think for Atlantic Canada, it was a justified growth period based on demand, and I think a lot of that value will remain.
Yeah, I think here looking at Halifax, it's hard for people that maybe aren't familiar with the city, but Halifax is a literal peninsula. Like the main core of the city is surrounded by water on three sides. So that land just continues to skyrocket in value. I think over the last year, we added like 20,000 people to Halifax, which by other cities is not a large amount, but for a city our size, that is a pretty significant population growth. And so the core land, because they are not making any more of it, is just going up and up and up in value, and that has floated the periphery areas, the areas just off the peninsula, across the Dartmouth, out to Bedford, out even on the Halifax side, up to 102, the whole direction. That's all been coming up. In terms of things that are going to sustain the values, well, that's one thing right there. That's going to sustain value because that land is so expensive. But additionally, we've got the biggest public sector of anywhere east of Ottawa, and that includes, biggest military port on the East Coast, the universities, hospitals. Like we are, if you look at the Atlantic provinces, it's just one big province. We are the Mecca. We are the capital city. We are the commercial hub. We're just kind of where business is done in Atlantic Canada, and increasingly there's more business coming here. And when people even migrate back, like if you're a young person who grew up in New Brunswick and maybe you went to Alberta, when you come back to look at the East Coast, you're probably not going back to New Brunswick. You're probably going back to Halifax. So I think our market here is really, really resilient, in addition to the fact that, as per Neal's point, we were undervalued at the time. So I still feel good about our trend. Last year, like everyone, we kind of had this big run up between January and call it May, where in those, matter of few months, we probably went up about 16%, something absurd. And then we gave about 8% of it back from that peak to the end of the year. But that's still 8% growth over 2022. And some of these projections this year saying another 8% here in 2023. I don't know if it'll be that robust, but there's such an underlying value support here because of our labor force and how it's like those public sector jobs are not going anywhere.
Yeah, we get the universities too, right?
Yeah,
we
they're
get the
not going
port, we
anywhere.
get the military, we get the port, we've got the
Shipping,
universities, we get the head office of the government, capital city.
Yeah.
We've got half of people in Nova Scotia live in greater Halifax, HRM. I think we're the economic engine, and we tend to not be as volatile as the other regions. We don't have one industry that oil collapse, Calgary collapses.
Yeah.
We don't have that. We've got an array of jobs, and a lot of them are government funded.
Yeah,
And
like
those
you look
ones
at the
don't go
history
away.
of our province, when we shut down coal and paper and fisheries, things were tough because we were heavily reliant on those primary industries, right? Those production-based jobs. But now we're pretty reliant on the public sector, which tends to not go anywhere. The education stuff's been huge because we're educating a lot of people here in Halifax. And now with student visas internationally, that's been a big gateway. We fast-tracked the permanent resident program, even though they've kind of peeled that back a little bit. So all of these things, there's been a massive, massive push on migration here, and it's worked. Like our city is exploding.
The last thing I would say to add on to Chandler's point is, like with that bump of growth we had in the last few years, our downtown core, I think, officially kind of turned a corner and became a place that people could actually want to go to. Like it's a bit of a destination. Because before it was a bit sleepy, and now I find like there's a lot of really nice restaurants. You can enjoy the boardwalk. There are boat charters, Sea-Doos. Like there's just
Bigger concerts are coming here.
Bigger concerts.
Yeah.
Like there's actually a bit of an attraction now to come and visit the Halifax waterfront. Because before it was literally half parking lots.
Yeah.
And so I find I think once you teeter over that, like people who immigrate from another big cities, like, oh, like there's a bit of a pulse here. Other parts of Canada, like, you know what I mean? They can actually see themselves enjoying that. And so, that was another thing.
My wife and I, we live in Dartmouth, and Halifax 10, 15 minutes away, and it's like, oh, they opened like the Mirror, a nice 5-star hotel on let's go to the Mirror for a night. Let's, and people are coming to Halifax because there's so much to do, and there's, just the little coffee shops and the vibe of Halifax.
Yeah,
is
a
just
lacrosse
really
team.
Cool
We've
vibe.
always had the Mooseheads, major juniors.
Soccer.
We've got a soccer
Soccer's
team
doing
here
well.
now as well. So there's a lot of good things going on.
Thanks for listening so far. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that bell button so you always know when new content is coming out. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, please leave a 5-star rating and leave a review and subscribe. And if you are interested in learning more, please visit our website at controlandcompound.com to sign up for a free education session with one of our wealth coaches. Yeah, there's definitely some growth in Halifax for sure. We're seeing more and more people want to stay, those students and stuff stay and want to live here. But there's not a lot available on the market to get into real estate if you want to start real estate investing in Halifax. So what are your thoughts on getting into the market in real estate to be able to jump in there? I know you've got a land development that you've got on the go now. How's that working?
Yeah, the one maybe scary thing about our city is that we're at this tipping point that's been created essentially by histories of neglect from our provincial government when it comes to affordable housing supply. And then you could even say at the municipal level, just really slow planning approvals. We have nowhere near built at the pace to sustain this growth. So we've been putting this push on immigration and it's been really successful, except we have nowhere for people to live. And the planning process was very, very slow for approvals. And of course, everything takes so long, and we had this really good, what's called the center plan, which was a complete remapping, a rezoning of the core of the city. The problem is it took 3 years, and by the time they were done the cost of construction has skyrocketed. The cost of money has skyrocketed. So even though there are a bunch of projects now approved, a lot of them have been shelved, including a project that I've been working on for a number of years, where the numbers just wouldn't make sense. As soon as the money got really expensive to borrow, along with the high cost of construction, it was no longer viable. Now I'm hoping to revisit that this year. That's kind of my priority, because that's in total I've got something like 300 units worth of developable land here in town, and I could probably fill all 300 if they were built. I could probably fill them in 3 weeks.
I was going to say in like 3 days. If you could process the applications fast enough.
Yeah. I'd have to call a lot of references in those 3 weeks, but they would fill almost instantaneously. But the provincial government hasn't built a public housing project of any significance here locally in about 40 years. So we have 2 generations where there's just no new inventory for public housing, and that's caused a real problem right now. There's a lot of displaced tenants at the lower income and more vulnerable part of the market. And then the pace of construction, both single-family residential and multi-unit, has been way too slow. I've seen reports of we would need 3,500 units just to catch up for the existing requirement of multi-units.
If not more, and we don't even have that much on the go.
Yeah.
One thing I want to add to, everyone knows interest rates have gone up a ton, so obviously that made the cost of borrowing money so expensive and hard to build. But I feel like since even when I first started looking at concrete construction, the price from 3-4 years ago to today is probably up 50%. Yeah. You probably could have got a building up in the low 200s per door out of concrete not that long ago here, and now it's going to be over $300,000 a door. That's huge. It's 50% plus your lending cost is now up.
Plus the land cost. Yeah.
So $300,000 a door, and that's what, 2 bedroom, 2 bath kind of thing. 1 bedroom.
They probably average 1 bedroom.
Yeah,
plus 10.
Small, 700 square feet. Yeah.
Yeah, your ratios would be usually about 60% 1 bedrooms, 10% bachelors, and then the rest would be a mix of 2 bedrooms and 1 plus 10s.
Yeah. Well, I was in Toronto on the weekend. I was at a real estate conference, and they were launching this new pre-construction downtown, and it was only $1,500 per square foot. But it actually
deals on deals.
It made sense for the area. Could make sense for the area and stuff. So in Halifax, we oh my God, it's going to be $300,000 a unit, and then you look at some other cities, and it's oh well. I guess that's not as crazy if the rents catch up. But the land development, I'm fascinated. I got a couple of pieces of land I want to do stuff with, but I think there's a real barrier to entry for the land development because you're tying up your money for a number of years. You're getting no revenue coming in from that. So it excludes a lot of people from that marketplace. And when something's not as competitive, well, there's more opportunities to take advantage of it. But what's sort of the process from when you buy a piece of land? How much can you finance the purchase for, carrying costs, and then applying for the permits and stuff? Just kind of walk me through a deal.
Yeah, so typically with land, you've got to put 50% down on the land. That's pretty standard. Sometimes
not 100.
If not 100. the lender typically wants to see a viable plan of like, okay, well, what are you doing with the land in a reasonable timeline? Because they don't have much interest in financing the land, but they'd be really keen to finance your overall project. So depending on how they feel about that.
Inventory that you already have.
Yeah.
So you can debt service it with rents. Let's say you already have 100 units, they can debt service that 50% loan.
Yeah.
Potentially.
But if you're just kind of new off the block and you don't have other, income that you can show could support a loan on the land, they would potentially not give you any financing at all on the land. As a result, a lot of land deals are done with vendor financing, at least a component of vendor financing, because in that case, the vendor can just say, I'll give you the other 50% if the lender won't top you up. You come up with 50%, I'll hold a note for the other 50, and that's how you do it. Carrying costs can be pretty low because if it's raw land, you're essentially just paying tax, and depending on if you have a loan on it or not, you may not even need to put insurance on it, or just some really minimal liability insurance. The development is going to vary by municipality. Here in Halifax, it is very expensive. Our water permits now are up to $3,000 a unit. So on a 60-unit development, you're $180,000 just to have the privilege of water service, even though your building might only be 30 feet wide. So they're basically just running one line to the building, and they're going to charge you $180,000, which is why rents are so high and why projects are so high. And then, you've got all your soft costs of surveying, environmental. It's not hard to get to around, probably around $5,000 a door in soft costs before you hit construction. So on like a 60-unit building, that's
on a 60 unit, if you go to a small, like 30 unit, you're going to be probably even higher per door. Like you get a little bit of ratio there, because like I'm doing a 30 and he wants about $125,000 just for the permitting process. That doesn't include paying for the permits.
I'm probably light on that.
Yeah, and it's gone up a ton too. Because same thing. There's only so many architects that are kind of, I don't want to say decent, but like
10.
Yeah, so it's probably closer to 10, I would say, on average. And the smaller the development, the more that ratio is going to go up, right?
So 125 grand for the development. Sorry, what?
To get me to the point of being able to actually have a permit. So they'll do the drawings, the engineering, and everything associated with it. So that's about $4,000 a door. Then I actually have to buy the permit. So water will be $100,000, and then the building permit will be another $50,000 to $100,000. So I'm looking at like $350 grand on this to get a 30 unit rolling after I already bought the piece
and then
of
you
land.
might have had to have done $10,000 to $30,000 worth of environmental, $15,000 of surveying. Geotechnical would run you another $7,000. You might need to do a shadow study because heaven forbid your shadow casts over a walkway.
Yeah.
All of these things, right? So the soft
wind
costs
survey.
There are wind like down here.
Downtown,
window, traffic studies, all of these things. So
and then you get rejected.
Yeah, it is price prohibitive. Now, one of the things that skyrocketed values of land, for better or worse, in the city is that rezoning of the city. So it used to be really difficult because you'd be like, hey, what can I do here? They're like, I don't know. Just submit an application and we'll think about it.
What do you want
to do?
do?
And that might take like 2 years. Like literally, it took me over 2 years to get my project approved. Well over 2 years, because they had no real clear guidelines. Your measure was effectively like how well do you fit into the neighborhood, which if you're trying to go into an area that needs improvement, that is ripe for development, and there's nothing around you, it's hard for you to say why you should be able to do 6 or 8 stories there. Now that they've remapped the city, you kind of have this like, okay, in this area, I know I can do this. In this area, I know I can do that. And that's sped the process, and it's made it really easy to value, like, okay, in this area, I know that I can do 6 stories. Based on that square footage, that means I could probably do 80 units there. Based on 20 a door, that site's worth $1.6 million. Right? Like it's really easy to do that math now. The problem is as a buyer, you can no longer get deals because you used to get a lot of the lift by taking the risk. Like I bought my land on Portland Street for I think $600,000 with I think 75% vendor. I think the vendor did all the finance for it. I can't quite recall, but the land was $600,000, and I think I peaked out my appraisal at just over $3 million. Right, so there's a pretty big lift, which then can help finance the build because I can go to my lender and say, "Listen, I've got $2.5 million of equity in the property. Can that be my down payment component of the build?" Right, so if my build's $15 million, I've got this amount of equity in the property. But now you're paying full freight for land in a lot of cases because the secret's out, right? People know, like, okay, in that area you can do this.
And do you see people sell once the development project? Like I've got a client that did this. He beautiful story. A new Canadian came here when he was young and worked his job, worked hard, and started buying places next to him. Next thing you know, he owned basically the city block in the north end, and then got it approved for this big project. Boom.
Yeah.
Took a check from some developer in Toronto, called up and said, "I'll give you this," and he said, "All right." So
A lot of guys do that. It's like flipping the project.
yeah.
And it's really because you can't get it out of the ground like that, and which is very common because it's super price prohibitive to get the land and get an approval. Then to actually be able to start construction is another extremely price prohibitive thing, where the financing rules are difficult, and just getting a bank to bite in. Like banks, not even if you have the land and the money, the bank might still not lend to you because you've never built before. Like there's so many that I get cranky about this a lot because I'm someone who I'm full of piss and vinegar and I want to do this and everything makes sense on paper, but they just won't do it because I'm young and because I don't have an experience doing it or someone backing me. And I understand that risk, but they make the barriers to entry so high sometimes. I feel like it makes it so only people who basically have established themselves and already have a ton of wealth and buildings will build. But I'm like, in a lot of these locations, they're not going to touch them because why would they go build in a lower end neighborhood when they can just do the ones all along the main roads and the better areas, right?
There's also the cost issue is, to your point there about your client, they might have had a project that, because the cost of construction is so high, it's like, okay, you can build this project and it's going to cost you $15 million. And when you're done the building's going to be worth $15 million. Right? Like that's the reality right now in a lot of cases. Or you could not build it. You could sell it to this guy over here and you make $1 million.
Yeah.
You don't have to lift a finger. Right? You did all the hard work before, but you don't have to spend 2.5 years building this thing, extending the money, only to have an asset that when you're done is worth exactly what you paid for it. People do that all the time. They flip these projects.
So let's go back to a smaller BRRRR. So an investor comes to you guys and hears the podcast and says, "Great, interested in Halifax." Once you buy that property you want to renovate, how tough is it to get tradespeople? And do you guys have like companies you use, preferred people? Do you help coach those new clients? Like how would that work, especially for an out of town person looking to invest in the Halifax market? What would be the process?
So I would say for a long time it was difficult to get tradespeople, but I think the market has started to change already, where a lot of large projects were canceled just with rate hikes, and then also again it's prohibitive to buy, like we talked about earlier. So there's trades availability now. I think for both Chandler and I or anyone in our group, we literally actually part of like forming the group is we have basically a Rolodex of all of the contractors that we utilize on our projects and have done work for our clients. And so pretty much they've all been vetted by us. And so, yeah, if someone's coming in from out of town, I have lots of Ontario clients that will buy. They're never here. And I'll just be like, boom, I'll send them 15 contacts and they're lined up and boom, electrical, plumbing, and they know they can trust them and go through with it. And like I said, I do find now it's a lot easier to get people. Like I think back to about a year ago, I'd call like, hey, I need this. And like, I'm probably 6 to 8 weeks out, and now I'm getting the call like, "Hey, do you have some work?" Like I literally had a call.
Yeah, it's like, "Oh, so I had 2 new construction places fall through. If you need anything," I'm like, "Oh, this is a painter who'd worked his way down my Rolodex because he was never available, right? And now he needs a gig, and I gave his number to someone." But this is why we're talking about this. If you're investing in real estate, your real estate agent should own multi-unit properties.
100%.
They just should, right?
Yeah,
Like,
we say
because-
that all the time. You want to work with the people that are doing it because they know what they're doing and they know it well. And
Exactly. Just like your financial advisor, your financial planner should own multi-units if that's a part of your priority. Your accountant should be the same way.
Yep.
Your whole team should be invested in the same stuff that you are because they're going to know. And in the actual practical case of renovating a property, they will have the contacts because they've done it as well.
100%. And actually, that's I think how a lot of my clients have come to me is that they're dealing with someone who doesn't know, not to talk bad on anybody, but they're kind of struggling to find the people in place. But the other thing I was just going to add is that prices have also come down. Like for a long time there, especially like on painting a unit, it was like, oh, it's $1,500, now it's $2,100, now it's $2,600, and like it was just kept going up, and I just kind of had to bite the bullet to get the units done. And now I got a quote, and then someone called me and like, I'll beat the quote. And now it's like working its way back down. And I'm like, oh, perfect. This is kind of, so in some sense, again, if you can get a good buy right now, there's a really great opportunity to get the work done for less. Understanding though that on the back end, you may still not get all of your money out, but you're going to be into it for a lot cheaper than you would have been 6-8 months ago. And in the long run, it'll pan out to be great for you.
So labor's coming down. What about the cost of goods, in particular concrete? That's always I got a couple clients in the concrete business. Did we see the same spike in concrete as we did in all other building supplies? Has that come down? Because I know a lot of the concrete buildings now, even the homes, some of them are being built with concrete. I think Christina's got a rental property in the go, and she used the what was
ICF.
it? ICF.
Yeah, we
nice.
had to. Yeah, because we couldn't get someone to come do the concrete. So Jordan had to go out and take the course. He went out and did it himself. Yeah, I was like, well, it's a new life skill, babe. You got this.
Yeah,
totally doing it.
I wouldn't be able to speak to the actual supply of concrete material, but the labor and the price per square foot of concrete work just went nuts.
Yeah.
And when this is actually, I was about to break ground on that project. As I said, all permits were paid for. And the issue is we had someone ready to dig the hole. We couldn't pin down a concrete form worker to get us out of the hole, right?
Yep.
And so you can't just have a hole sitting there. And we actually we think we got good news. This, form worker over here just had a job cancel on them. And they were, on that job for, I don't know what their rate would be, but call it like $11 a square foot. And someone out there that works in concrete is going to be like, what's he even talking about? But just say it was something like that. We're like, this is great. We'll be able to lock him in at that price. And they said, yeah, no, we're off that job. We'd be open to taking your job, but it's 16. And like that would just happen in the difference when they signed a contract on one project, which was maybe 6 or 8 months earlier, that project fell through. Now they're here. They wouldn't substitute at the same price. They were up, 50%. So there's only a handful of concrete form workers that can do high-rise or multi-unit buildings in the province, and so they're pretty sought after.
Yeah.
Supply and demand, right?
Big
you
time
can't
supply and
get it.
demand.
Yeah, so you're going to pay the price if you want it done.
100%. I know when I went to, actually through Lindsay's, I went to go do a project I was looking at, and same thing, what they were going to do is fly in crews from Quebec. We just don't have the local power, and so
yeah.
like basically what we do is we fly them in for 3 weeks. They're going to get your concrete done, and then they leave.
I tried to do that for drywallers, and we were contacting people in New Brunswick, we were contacting people in PEI and Newfoundland, and they're like, no, we're too busy. We got enough work here too, right? And we had budgeted like a really high amount for drywall because we knew that drywall was going up. And so we put a nice juicy number that it worked out to be $18,000 a unit for drywall. And these are 700 square foot units, right? So 18,000. Now, of course, you also have your hallways, your common areas, blah, blah. But it worked out on a per door basis of like $18,000. The cheapest quote we could find was $30,000, and that was from someone who ultimately said, "Yeah, that's what it would be, but I don't want the work. I'm too busy."
Yep.
And so then we found a couple crews who'd be like $35,000, and it gets you thinking like maybe I should just hang drywall all day because at 30 to 35,000 a door. But that's like drywall would be an exact example of something that would. And some of that is really material heavy because drywall went up and cost a lot. But from a labor perspective, that's something that you could really see coming down in price as the industry slows down because new construction for even single family residential has dropped off a cliff. Permits and starts are way, way down. So those crews are going to be out there and they're going to be hungry.
Yeah. Same plumbing supply, electrical supply. Those must have doubled and tripled throughout the pandemic.
So supplies doubled and tripled. Real estate prices shot up. Land prices shot up. So the 2% rent cap makes sense to you guys in Halifax?
No, obviously not. I think the fact that it was slapped in overnight was kind of a crazy one for me. The other thing is that 2% made no sense because at the same time they're increasing property taxes by like 6-8%. Everyone knows insurance went up by 30 to 50% on commercial property. All utilities went up. So literally every single thing to do with owning a property, any maintenance went up through the roof. Like everything went up a ton. So them to put on 2% just seemed really ignorant in a lot of ways. And I'm now talking to a lot of people that like, again, you never feel it right away. It takes 18 months for it to happen and really start to feel the pain, 18 months, 2 years. And so now I'm starting to see people that are calling and they're like, I got to try and get my property taxes down because literally this building is running a negative. I never increased my rents. I think you were kind of stuck in the same boat where you never really felt the need to raise them that much because you knew that when it turned over, you could get the lift and it's a good tenant, whatever. But
or you had freedom under the Tenancy Act that if the climate changed and you needed to give everyone in the building $100 increase,
you could,
and you were below market anyway, they would be perfectly content to stay in that unit for $100 increase, and you could get that if things got tight on the maintenance of the building and the costs, and now you can't.
Yeah, and now the mindset, I think it's turned for all landlords is just like, I want the absolute maximum dollar I can always get because I need to cover my ass because I just got hosed for the last so many years. And so anyone that goes up for renewal, they charge an absolute ton because they're just like, first of all, we can't. The units aren't turning over, and then when I do get someone, I need that rent to be as high as possible because there's no being nice anymore.
And this is why rent control doesn't work. And it's funny, it's been proven to not work. The data shows it doesn't work. It's been tested in plenty of other areas. It doesn't work. But it really plays well on social media. And so this would be my cautionary tale to people thinking of investing here is understand that the tenancy laws here are very much in favor of the tenant and that public sentiment is currently going against landlord and the landlord industry. I know that's nationwide, but I had some investors who'd call me up and I would walk them through the rules here. And they're like, so why would people deal with that? That sounds horrible. I'm like, it can be pretty horrible. So you need to be mindful of that. And it's created a lot of problems because obviously as a landlord, you're highly, highly motivated to get vacant units. And that displaces people. But that's the situation that the government has, in a very short-sighted way, put us all in. And I say all because people won't like hearing this, tenants won't like hearing this, but this is a situation that's been created that's bad for both landlords and tenants.
Absolutely.
So which is exactly what everyone in the industry knew would happen, and now it's playing out, and I don't think the average person reading the headlines is fully aware of it. But now with all this immigration situation, it's gotten even worse because, unfortunately, these folks who had the gumption and the courage to uproot their life and come over here are going to be, taxed to be here. They're going to be charged all the things we like to charge people for. They're going to, work jobs that are going to be difficult jobs that in some cases people here aren't willing to work. And now they're told with the foreign buyer ban that they can't buy a house. So they have to rent. And they're walking into a rental environment where they are effectively going to pay for the whole building, right? So if there's one unit available, they're going to pay top rent to subsidize all the very privileged people who are sitting there well below market and patting themselves on the back because they got this win, but it ends up really exploiting new to country residents or anyone who goes through a divorce or separation, or anyone who has to leave a bad situation.
Change of job, pretty much anything changing in your life.
Yeah, you're just getting smoked. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, but.
Wow. And what's the long-term kind of prediction on what's going to happen to the rent cap? Is that going to go away? Are we going to see changes? What's your guys' take?
I personally think it's going to go modified. I think it's going to stay. I think now that they've broken that ice again, it's going to stay. But I've heard some rumblings of it being for older product, you can do 6 to 8%, and then newer product, you're stuck at 4%. And so I've heard stuff like that. I think that's ultimately going to stay, which I think those numbers are still too low. If they made them a bit higher, I could see things actually working out and it being reasonable. But I do see it staying. I think if they keep it that low, it's going to, like we've already said, perpetuate the issue. If you look at all the other cities, the second there was rent cap, everyone's not building apartments. Because the finances don't make sense anymore. Because it's just you guys get it. Expenses go like this. If you can only go like that with your income, every year you're going to lose more money.
What's the point?
So why would you build? So it just goes straight to condos.
Yeah, and there's fewer and fewer developments because of it. Because unless you can evict the tenants through a renovation, if you can't evict the tenant, why would you go and spend a couple $100,000 fixing up those units? If you can't increase the rent anyway, and you're going to rent it for what it is. And there's a good article in the paper a couple months ago here, and it was a guy had a bunch of homes outside the city, and he would rent them out to lower income people, very affordable. But then as his costs spiked, he's like, I was doing this really. He was a wealthy guy to help. But he goes, now I'm losing money every month on these. Mm-hmm. So when he ended up selling those properties, he goes, I sold 5 properties that had 3 or 4 units in them, and they were all bought as single-family homes. Somebody with money came in a little outside the city and said, yeah, I could live out there. And now we have 4 tenants displaced and nowhere for them to go.
Yeah,
all because of rent control.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there would be, without exaggeration, probably, 200 examples of that right now that people could call in and say what happened and why it happened. And I had a situation just in my own neighborhood where a landlord's like, I cannot keep you here, right? I'm losing money. And the tenant says, I totally understand. I will happily pay you $200 extra. It's like, here's the problem. In Nova Scotia, in its infinite wisdom, says that if you circumvent the cap, even if it's 2 adults agreeing that, okay, the 2% works out to be $30, but we all know that's unreasonable, right? Everything's up. We agree to $150. That's circumventing the cap, and you can be fined and penalized. You could have to pay the tenant back all of the rent. And obviously, like, the tenant might say, no, but I give you my word. Well, one little thing goes wrong. They make a call to the tenancy board, and as a landlord, you're getting slapped with fines. So you can't do it. You are put in a situation where you effectively have to evict tenants, even if they would rather stay and you would rather keep them. Right. So it's a bad situation. And I think, like Neal mentioned, this cap that we have in was called temporary. And the idea, it was sold as, oh, listen, this is just going to be temporary until the housing supply can catch up. And, now this rate has happened that the housing supply is just not going to catch up at all. Not most, but a lot of projects were shelved. I'd say probably 50% of projects were shelved.
Big projects, too. Like big developers. Those are the guys who really shelved it because they're really looking at the economics and it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. It was also kind of a running joke because, like, the new construction ones are going to, start at $1,800 given the cost of construction and the cost of the rates. So how's that going to impact affordability? Well, it's not. So at the end of this year, the cap is supposed to expire. The big question is, what's it going to be replaced with? It's hard to imagine just going totally disappearing. Now, in New Brunswick, their cap expired December of 2022, so it just expired. But they were capped at 3.8%, which is already quite a bit higher than 2%.
Double.
And now I think there's a process whereby you can increase it whatever you want, but there may be an arbitration process where a tenant could argue that it was an extraordinary increase, or it's above the market for the area, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a mediation process, which I think would make sense.
That would be really smart if we could actually handle the volume of tenancy here.
Yeah. And say, like, this is market rent. As long as, like, you can increase the rent while still keeping the person, say, 5% under market rent in the area for that product, that would be nice and reasonable, right? But it's hard because a lot of really good landlords and predominantly mom and pop operations who intentionally were keeping the rents a little bit low, we're then put in a situation where they're losing money every month, but also, like, they can't even make a modest increase. And
the resale's been affected because...
Well, they're going to sell it. They're going to sell it to someone who's effectively going to try to find a way to evict those people, right? So, it's a complete disaster.
Then the last thing I want to talk about for the listeners not from the East Coast. So we had a big change a year, 2 years ago now, where we can do those backyard bungalows and suites, which was a welcome change. What have you seen? How has that impacted things? Do you see a lot of them? Is it still relatively new? What's going on with that?
Yeah, I'll say for a lot of my first-time buyers, secondary suites is a super beneficial program because now there's a ton of homes within our city that were single-family and zoned for only single-family, and they were basically getting unaffordable for a young buyer. Now they have the opportunity to get in there and probably put something in the basement, or if they want to do something outside, it's a bit more expensive, I think, to do a standalone unit, but they can do on the cheap. They can put a unit in the basement, get that extra rent, and it gives them the ability to actually live in a house there. Like there was no chance before, and at the end of the day, it adds another unit to the market. So I think that was a good program that they put out. I see a fair bit of uptake on it, honestly, because it basically added a unit to everything. So even people who had a duplex, like, they're adding in that third unit or in the garage or out back. Again, I don't think it's going to solve the housing crisis, but I think it was a great option. The one thing that I've find kind of odd is, on the flip side, the Airbnb rules have now canceled the idea that you can actually rent out those secondary suites, which I feel like those are the perfect items, perfect kind of suites to rent.
The first draft of the new Airbnb rules are that you can take a secondary suite in your primary residence and Airbnb that, but not your backyard suite. Now, in future amendments, like, I feel like that'll probably change. I think they'll let you short-term rental the backyard suites, provided you're in an area where you're allowed to do that and it's your primary unit and all that sort of thing. The challenge with the backyard suites is that, price out a modular home that's 450 square feet and see where that sucker comes in. Yeah. If you're buying it off the rack, you're $150,000 for them to plunk it there. Maybe you're $130,000 for them to plunk it there, but you have to prepare the concrete slab. Then you have to run your sewer line from there to your main, right, which is going to be incredibly expensive. Then you get to pay the city for all of their beautiful permitting costs. So oftentimes, like, if you were to just hire a contractor and not contract the project yourself, a secondary suite might cost you around $170,000 to $180,000, which is still decent return because your carrying costs on that might be $1,000, but your rent would probably be around $1,700 plus utilities. So it makes sense. But they're not the super easy thing to finance, right? Like, you need a lender who's going to understand that this becomes a situation where you've got two products. You've got your product for the mortgage on the primary home, and then you've got effectively a secondary construction loan product, and then you'll need to refinance the whole package at the end. And for people who are maybe just first-time home buyers, that's a lot to wrap their head around. They're like, wait a second. So I just figured out how to own a house. Now I have to figure out how to build one and refinance. Again, you need a strong team around you to pull that off, but it is worthwhile.
Yeah, 100%. The other thing I was going to add is it's tough on the appraisal side because everything's so new. So I think appraisers are struggling to be able to value them the same as any other unit, especially the backyard suites, because we didn't have them. So they don't have like comps to be like, oh yeah, that house sold for $1 million with a backyard suite. That one sold for 700 without it.
Yeah.
Backyard suites worth $300,000.
And they're small square footage, and they only add like one bedroom. So when you think of an appraiser, they typically look at square footage and bedroom and bathroom counts. For $170,000 to add just one bedroom and one bathroom,
that's detached.
You know, it's hard to value that, because if it was in your house, it wouldn't add much value at all. You're maybe, I don't know, adding 60,000. But you're saying like, but here's my bill for 170. I think it'll get there.
Yep.
And that I think is going to be an avenue for young buyers. The other challenge we have here, and this is going to sound dumb. One, we have a lot of narrow lots in the core.
Yeah.
And two, we're super hilly. So if you have a backyard that goes like this, people are like, oh, maybe I can put a backyard suite down there. It's like, how are you going to get the sewer, right? Like, you're going to have a major lift station to get your sewer to the main. So these little nuances, it's not every lot that can do it, but it's a step in the right direction. I think some really ambitious people can make a good run at that if they figured out the model.
Yeah, backyard bungalow for 170, 180 grand, like 500 square foot, 600 square foot, whatever suite. I mean, half the people are going to say, well, I didn't pay that for my 2-story house. And, now again, because people don't appreciate how much things have increased in value.
Yeah.
But still, it's like, man, I only had $140,000 mortgage when I bought my house, and now I'm going to have another one of that size just to put a little backyard thing in there. It's costs are just getting out of hand.
Yeah, but you can make a business case for it. I had a client do it in Fairview, which is a really popular area for doing that sort of thing, because the lots are fairly large and the zoning allows for it. And he converted a detached garage, but it was about $160,000 all in, and the garage was existing. It was rough, right? But like, he had some sticks and and a basic slab, but it's worked, right? He gets $1,600 in rent. It's added a lot of value to a property. I think it'll be a really nice thing too for people who already own property, and maybe they've had an equity growth in the property, and now they think, rather than go out there and try to buy a new duplex at full rate, because a duplex you're going to pay $250 to $350 a unit to buy a duplex. I can just add a unit here, brand new construction in the backyard of a property I already know for 170. It starts to look kind of good.
Yeah. No, like you said, it's a step in the right direction. It's going to help, but it's not going to solve anything, I don't think.
And it's pretty much all HRM. If you've got a single family or a duplex, you can add an additional unit if you meet the parameters, or is there limits on?
Essentially, yeah. You're, a planner at the city would hate saying that, but yes, essentially it's whatever you're allowed to do plus a unit. Right, so if you're in a residential area, a lot of the city's already been remapped as ER1, Established Residential 1, which is a primary residence plus a secondary suite, or Established Residential 2, which allows for 2 units plus a secondary suite. If you're in an area that has not yet been rezoned, because we haven't made our way out to Spryfield, Herring Cove, we haven't really gotten off the peninsula in downtown Dartmouth, but all those areas have already been told they can have a secondary suite. If you're in a residential area, you can add one more.
And is there any talk of changing the zoning outside of town? Like I've got some land in Cole Harbour that I haven't done anything with yet. It's ER1, but I'm like, is that going to ever change? Like what's the future?
No,
there?
they're just going to change it because it's probably R1 right now, and they're going to change it to ER1, and they're going to say what ER1 can do in that area, but it'll allow secondary suite.
The idea is the center plan's got packages, and every package will start to address the other neighborhoods outside of the core. So you'll see, I think, rumors, I think Spryfield's next on the list. And then it'll probably be continuing down like Portland Street, Main Street, and then kind of wrap it around the rest of the city.
So it's not going to reach Fall River for quite some time, which again is a problem. Like, if they had done this, because this does add a lot of clarity for people, and it speeds up the approval process, and they should have done it 15 years ago, because now we desperately need it. And by the time they got it done, all the costs just skyrocketed. But if this had been done and ready to go, say in like 2018 or 2016, my gosh, we would have built thousands of units across the city, and we would be in not quite as bad a situation as we are.
Selfishly, I'm glad it didn't, because it gave me an opportunity to buy in.
And last thing I want to talk about permitting. You talked about the wait in Halifax, but we were talking before we started recording here. Now, Christina, I know you're doing a build down about an hour outside the city. Where's your
40 minutes or so Falls Lake.
And tell me about your processing or your application to get permits and stuff. How long did that stuff take?
Oh, it was like days. It was very easy. Maybe weeks at the tops, but like it was all just done over email and whatnot. And they, you know, me and Neal were talking about it. You literally called them and they're like, "Oh yeah, just pop by the office and pay whenever you're ready." You know, it's
nice.
very chill in the rural area outside of the city. The permits are much easier to come by for sure. You didn't
Even in
have
other
those
major
issues.
municipalities, like when I went for a development agreement in Truro, like we show up and the whole planning group was there, like not one person, but like the actual whole, everyone that's responsible for planning in that town was there to meet us. It was like, oh my gosh, this is very different than Halifax, where you have to like book with some cranky person for an appointment 3 months from now, and you sit there with someone who doesn't seem like they want to talk to you, and it's one person in a cog, right? So that's why a lot of people that have been investing in Nova Scotia have been going to these other little secondary markets where we have, in a lot of cases, a little bit of aging population who are looking to downsize their home and want the convenience of rental. And then also a little influx of younger people who are being squeezed out price-wise from Halifax going to areas like Bridgewater, Kentville, Truro, and stuff like that. So those other markets have done well the last couple of years too.
100%.
Great. All right, guys, listen, where do people get a hold of you? What's the best way for people to find out more about the Master Keys podcast and what you guys do?
Yeah, I mean, we have a YouTube channel and an Instagram at Master Keys Podcast. So take a look at those. And we have a TikTok too, if you're into TikTok. But yeah, those are the best. And then Chandler and I, mine's Remax Neal, my Instagram handle, and yours is T-Chan.
Mine's T-Chan-H, I think.
T-Chan-H.
But yeah, I mean, obviously you're listening to a podcast or you're watching this right now. So wherever you found this is where you will also find us. So it's that easy.
Perfect. Guys, that was fantastic. Thanks so much. Appreciate your time today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to this podcast. If you're listening on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and hit that bell button. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. And if you want more information, check out our website, controllandcompound.com, and you can sign up for an education session with one of our wealth coaches.